She was just the maid, invisible to the billionaire heir who humiliated her. He lived in a world of luxury, she one of hard work. But what no one in that mansion knew was that the blood running through her veins was the same that built that Empire family secret kept under lock and key. Have you ever felt out of place? Like you were trapped in a life that wasn't your own, dreaming of a place where you truly belong? This is the story of Christine Gomez, a young woman who felt an inexplicable connection to every room she cleaned, not knowing her destiny was woven into its very walls. Get ready for a journey of romance and drama, where a rich man, poor woman love story transforms into a search for a true identity. This isn't just a love story, it's an emotional roller coaster of redemption, a shocking plot twist, and the justice we all crave. The stakes will rise with every second. A cruel fiancé, a devastating frame-up, and a broken heart will bring Christine to her lowest point. Believing all is lost, she'll be thrown out and humiliated. But little does she know, this is just the beginning of a life-changing revelation that will shake the foundations of one of the most powerful families in the world. If you believe that truth always prevails, this story is for you. Comment Destiny if you're ready for the twist. Like this video is a sign that you're rooting for justice. And most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell, because Christine's journey is about to begin, and you won't want to miss a single second. While cleaning the lavish Black family mansion, a place of staggering wealth and cold marble, Christine Gomez couldn't shake a strange feeling. It wasn't just a house, it was something more, a whisper of belonging she felt deep in her bones. Every portraitland hallway and sun-drenched conservatory seemed to welcome her, a silent recognition that the young maid simply couldn't explain. It was a bizarre, heart-aching pull to a world that wasn't hers. This inexplicable connection, however, was a source of private amusement for the arrogant heir. Ronald Black. He moved through the world with the easy confidence of someone who had never been denied anything. His life a stark contrast to the hard-working people who maintained his gilded cage. He saw Christine not as a person, but as part of the scenery, another cog in the machine of the vast billionaire family estate, and found her quiet reverence for the home utterly pathetic. To his mind, the world was a brutal, simple place you either possessed power or you were crushed by it. Hope was a fantasy, a childish delusion clung to by those on the bottom rung of life's ladder. He saw Christine's dreamy disposition not as innocence, but as a willful ignorance of her station. He felt it was his duty, in a twisted sense, to shatter such illusions. It was a casual cruelty he practiced often, sharpening the edges of his own boredom on the feelings of others. One afternoon, he found her gazing out a window in the grand library, her eyes filled with a wistful longing. Daydreaming about a life you'll never have? He sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. The words were designed to wound, to remind her of her place in this classic rich man, poor woman dynamic. He wanted to see her spirit crumble, to prove that hope was a foolish luxury for people like her, ensuring she felt thoroughly humiliated. A flash of hurt crossed Christine's face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a quiet composure that infuriated him. She simply nodded and returned to her duties, her silence a more powerful retort than any words she could have mustered. For her, this wasn't about a fantasy, it was a genuine, emotional mystery. Why did this place, which housed so much arrogance, feel so much like the home her heart had always searched for? A question of destiny. As she walked away, Christine took a slow, steadying breath, her inner voice rising above his venom. His words could not touch the secret truth she held within her. The feeling this house gave her, that sense of peace, of rightness, was hers alone. It was a silent, unbreakable shield against his scorn. Let him think what he wanted, she knew what she felt, and that strange, powerful connection was more real to her than his casual disdain. It was a clue to her own hidden story. The sheer contrast between them was almost staggering. He, the prince of a cold, glittering castle, saw only bricks, mortar, and status. She, the humble servant, saw a soul, a history that seemed to intertwine with her own. This fundamental difference in perception was the heart of the unspoken drama that was beginning to unfold. A story of a secret identity that was still utterly unknown to them both. Ronald scoffed and turned away, dismissing the encounter from his mind. But the image of her sad, knowing eyes lingered, a ghost in the back of his thoughts. He didn't know it yet, but that brief, cruel interaction was the first thread to be pulled in a tapestry that was about to unravel, revealing a shocking truth that would connect their two worlds in a way neither of them could ever imagine. Christine Gomez's life was a study in careful discipline and quiet dreams. Every dollar she earned as a maid was meticulously accounted for, most of it saved for a future she hoped would one day be brighter. She lived in a tiny apartment that was worlds away from the Black family mansion, her existence a testament to hard work and resilience. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was hers, built on the simple principle of earning every single thing she had. Her small apartment was her sanctuary, a cozy nest filled with secondhand books and the scent of cinnamon. The walls were adorned not with expensive art, but with postcards of places she dreamed of visiting. Every object had a story. Every corner was a reflection of her gentle spirit. It was a space that radiated warmth and personality, a stark contrast to the cold, museum-like perfection of the mansion she cleaned. A home built with love, not just money. In stark contrast, Ronald Black's world was one of cynical indulgence. He had never worked a day in his life, his every whim catered to by the immense wealth of the billionaire family. His days were a blur of fast cars, expensive parties, and meaningless flings, a lifestyle designed to numb the deep-seated boredom that plagued him. He saw kindness as a weakness and trust as a fool's game, his heart shielded by layers of inherited cynicism. Just last week, had impulsively bought a vintage sports car for a seven-figure sum, only to complain it was the wrong shade of blue and abandon it in one of the estate's many garages. He treated people with the same disposability, cycling through friends and lovers with a detached indifference. This wasn't just wealth, it was a poverty of the soul, a complete inability to find value in anything that couldn't be bought or sold, a sad truth of his existence. This chasm between their lives was the very definition of a rich man, poor woman story, though there was no hint of a love story on the horizon. For Christine, every penny was a victory, a step toward an unseen goal. For Ronald, money was an infinite resource, something to be burned through without a second thought. She found joy in small things: a good book, a quiet evening while he chased ever-greater thrills, only to find them hollow and unsatisfying. Her simple, hard-working existence was a direct rebuke to his life of excess, though he was too self-absorbed to notice. She represented a kind of integrity he couldn't comprehend, a strength forged in necessity rather than entitlement. While he was drowning in everything, she was learning to survive with almost nothing. This fundamental difference set the stage for a profound drama, a collision of values that was bound to create sparks and a potential for a beautiful romance. In her small room, Christine would often trace the lines of her palm, wondering about her own destiny and the parents she never knew. Her life was a blank page, a past shrouded in mystery. She held onto a quiet hope that her journey had a greater purpose, a meaning beyond the daily toil. It was this hope that fueled her, a gentle but unbreakable spirit that would soon be tested in the most unimaginable ways. Meanwhile, Ronald felt trapped by his own legacy, bored by the very privilege that defined him. He was heir to an empire, but felt like a king with no kingdom of the heart. He didn't know it, but his path was careening toward a life-changing intersection with the one person who could show him what it meant to have something worth fighting for. Something real in his world of glittering illusions. To Ronald Black, Christine was utterly invisible, a ghost in a uniform who existed solely to keep his world polished and perfect. He never made eye contact, never used her name, and certainly never considered the life she lived outside the mansion's imposing gates. He was completely oblivious to the quiet dignity she carried with her, a silent resilience that was her only armor in a world that saw her as nothing more than a servant, a simple maid. He was equally blind to the deep, unspoken sadness that often clouded the eyes of his grandfather, the aging family patriarch. The old man, the architect of the Black family fortune, seemed to carry the weight of the world on his frail shoulders. He would often sit for hours in his study, lost in thought, his gaze distant. Ronald mistook this melancholy for the ramblings of old age, never once considering it might be a symptom of a profound, lingering regret. The truth was, the mansion felt less like a home to the patriarch and more like a mausoleum of his mistakes. Every portrait on the wall, every polished piece of silver, seemed to mock him with memories of a past he couldn't fix. He saw the ghost of his estranged daughter in every corner, heard her laughter in the long, empty halls. His immense wealth had bought him everything but peace, leaving him a lonely king on a gilded, sorrowful throne. This profound sadness made him observant. He noticed things others missed, like the way Christine would gently handle old books in the library, or the soft, sad smile she'd have when looking at the family portraits. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who seemed to feel the history of the house as he did. This quiet, unassuming girl possessed a sensitivity that was entirely absent in his own flashy, callous family, especially in his grandson. The patriarch saw things his grandson did not. He noticed Christine's gentle nature, the meticulous care she took in her work, and something else, a flicker of familiarity in her eyes that stirred a long dormant memory. He watched her from a distance, his heart aching with a family secret he had buried decades ago, a painful chapter he thought was closed forever. Her presence in the house felt like a twist of destiny, both a comfort and a torment. This disconnect between the generations was the central drama of the billionaire family. Ronald was obsessed with the future, with power, with maintaining the family status. The patriarch, on the other hand, was haunted by the past, by a mistake that had cost him a piece of his soul. He saw in Ronald's arrogance a reflection of his own youthful pride, a flaw that had led to his greatest sorrow, and he feared history was doomed to repeat itself. Christine, unaware of this silent observation, continued her work with a quiet grace. She felt the old man's gaze on her sometimes, but it wasn't judgmental like Ronald's. It was different, it was searching, almost mournful. There was an unspoken, emotional connection between the old man at the end of his life and the young woman just beginning hers, a bond forged in secrets and sadness that neither of them yet understood. Ronald remained blissfully unaware, too caught up in his own shallow existence to see the tectonic plates of his family's history shifting right under his feet. He couldn't see that the invisible maid and the sad old patriarch were two halves of a puzzle that, once solved, would unlock a shocking truth about his family and his own true identity and legacy. The stage was being set for a revelation. During a lavish party thrown by the billionaire family, the mansion glittered with opulence and fake smiles. It was a night designed to showcase the Black family's power, and Christine was working tirelessly to remain unseen. As she was quietly clearing glasses near the study, Ronald's cruel fiancée, a woman as beautiful as she was venomous, cornered her. "What are you doing? Eavesdropping on your betters?" she hissed, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to turn and stare. It was a blatant act of cruelty designed to put the lowly maid in her place. The accusation of eavesdropping hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed at Christine's integrity. All eyes were on her, expecting tears or a flustered denial. Ronald stood nearby, a smirk playing on his lips, enjoying the spectacle. For a moment, the world stopped, and Christine felt the familiar sting of being humiliated in this ongoing rich man, poor woman saga. This was pure, undiluted drama. A wave of whispers rippled through the onlookers, their eyes glinting with the thrill of a public shaming. They were like a pack of well-dressed wolves, sensing blood in the water. For them, this was merely evening entertainment, a brief diversion from their champagne and hollow conversations. Their collective judgment pressed down on Christine, an immense weight of social condemnation that would have crushed a lesser person. She was utterly alone in a sea of hostile faces. But instead of crumbling, Christine met the fiancé's icy glare with a calm, steady gaze. "I was only doing my job," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I will leave if my presence is disturbing you." There was no anger, no fear, just a simple statement of fact delivered with a grace that was utterly disarming. She handled the situation with a poise that none of the wealthy guests, least of all the fiancé, could have mustered. What one word best describes the fiancé's attitude right now? Let me know in the comments. The fiancé was left speechless, her planned power play completely neutralized by Christine's unexpected composure. The moment was a quiet triumph of dignity over cruelty, a heart-aching display of inner strength. From across the room, hidden in the shadows of the grand staircase, the family patriarch had witnessed the entire exchange. He had seen the fiancé's malice and, more importantly, Christine's incredible grace under fire. He felt a surge of disgust for the scene he had witnessed and for his grandson who stood by and allowed it. He saw the fiancé not as a future member of his family, but as a symptom of the disease of arrogance that had infected it. In that moment, he realized that true class had nothing to do with wealth. It was about character, integrity, and grace, qualities this young maid possessed in abundance, and his own kin sorely lacked. He had expected the girl to be crushed, but she had risen above the pettiness with a strength that impressed him deeply. It was the kind of strength he hadn't seen in his family for a very long time. It reminded him of someone else, someone from his past who had possessed that same quiet fire. A seed of curiosity, already planted, now began to sprout in the old man's mind. There was more to this girl than met the eye. While Ronald's fiancée fumed in silent defeat, the patriarch made a quiet mental note. This was no ordinary servant. Her resilience was a beacon in the shallow, cutthroat world he inhabited. He didn't know why, but he felt a sudden fierce need to protect her, a paternal instinct that surprised him. Her destiny, he was beginning to suspect, was far more significant than just cleaning this house. Days later, while tasked with cleaning a forgotten corner of the mansion's massive library, Christine stumbled upon an old, dusty book. It was a collection of poems, its leather cover cracked with age. As she carefully dusted it off, a faded photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. She picked it up and her breath caught in her throat. It was a picture of a young woman with a radiant smile and eyes that held a hint of rebellious fire. An instant, powerful bond surged through Christine, a jolt of recognition so profound it felt life-changing. She had never seen this woman before, and yet, she felt as if she was looking at a reflection of her own soul. The woman in the picture felt like family, a kindred spirit reaching out to her across the years. It was an intensely emotional moment, a mysterious connection that defied all logic and reason, a clue to a past she never knew. She traced the woman's face with her thumb, a strange sense of grief and love welling up inside her. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been, like meeting a mother she never had. This person in the photograph understood her, she just knew it. The rebellious spark in her eyes was the same fire Christine kept hidden deep within her own heart, the part of her that refused to be broken by the cruelty of the world, a silent promise of a hidden strength. She quickly tucked the photograph into her apron pocket, her heart pounding in her chest. It felt like she had discovered a sacred artifact, a piece of a puzzle she didn't even know she was meant to solve. Who was this woman? And why was her picture hidden away in this old book? The discovery felt like a sign, a breadcrumb left by destiny on her path, pointing toward the secret of her true identity. Throughout the day, Christine couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. The woman's smile was etched into her mind. There was a story there, a life lived within these walls that had been forgotten, erased. This small, faded image felt more real to her than the cold, imposing grandeur of the billionaire family she served. It was a tangible link to a past, a whisper of a family secret just waiting to be unearthed. This discovery ignited a new sense of purpose in Christine. She was no longer just a maid drifting through life. She was a detective on a silent mission. The mansion transformed from a place of employment into a labyrinth of clues. Every old painting, every dusty heirloom, now seemed to hold a potential answer to the questions that were burning inside her. A quiet quest for the truth had begun, a personal journey for redemption of a past she never had. This single photograph became her most prized possession, a source of secret comfort. In her lonely apartment, she would study it for hours, trying to divine its secrets. She felt a fierce protectiveness over the smiling woman, a loyalty to a memory that wasn't hers. She was determined to find out who she was, to give her story a voice again, no matter what the cost might be. She didn't know that this small photograph was the key to unlocking everything. It was the first concrete piece of evidence in a long-buried drama, a story of love, loss, and rebellion that the family patriarch had tried to forget. The ghost of the past had just been awakened, and it would soon demand to be heard, setting in motion a shocking chain of events. Shortly after Christine's discovery, the aging family patriarch fell gravely ill. A sudden weakness overcame him, confining him to his bed and leaving him isolated in his enormous suite of rooms. The once powerful man who had built an empire was now frail and lonely, a prisoner in his own home. The ever-busy members of the billionaire family, including Ronald, paid him fleeting, obligatory visits, but none stayed long enough to ease the profound loneliness that clung to him like a shroud. Christine, while performing her duties as a maid, saw the old man's solitude. Her heart went out to him. On a whim, driven by a simple human impulse, she decided to act. After finishing her work one evening, she quietly entered his room. Seeing him awake and staring blankly at the ceiling, she offered, "Sir, would you like me to read to you for a while?" The patriarch, surprised by the genuine kindness, simply nodded, his eyes weary but grateful. Looking for something to read, she noticed the dusty book of poems she had found in the library, which she had placed back on a nearby shelf. Unknowing of its deep significance, she picked it up, feeling it was the right choice. She settled into a chair beside his bed and began to read, her soft voice filling the silent room. The poems were about love, loss, and the untamable spirit of youth, themes that resonated deeply within her own heart. With each verse she read, a profound change came over the patriarch. His weary eyes filled with tears as memories he had suppressed for decades came flooding back. That book had been his estranged daughter's favorite. The poems were ones they used to read together, long before their bitter falling out, long before he lost her forever. This was not just a book, it was a sacred relic of a love he had destroyed, a painful and heart-aching reminder of his biggest regret. He didn't interrupt her, allowing her soothing voice to wash over him. It was a bittersweet agony. He was transported back in time, to a happier era when the halls of this mansion were filled with his daughter's laughter instead of echoing silence. He mourned not just for her, but for the man he used to be, before pride and wealth had poisoned his heart and fractured his family. It was a moment of deep, painful self-reflection. Christine was completely unaware of the emotional storm she had unleashed. She simply saw an old, sick man who seemed to be moved by the poetry. She continued to read, her voice a soothing balm to his wounded soul. For the first time in years, the patriarch didn't feel like a titan of industry or the head of a powerful family. He was just a father, mourning the granddaughter he never knew and the daughter he drove away. As she finished a chapter and looked up, she saw the tears on his cheeks. She offered him a kind, questioning smile, and he simply reached out a frail hand and patted hers. "Thank you, my dear," he rasped, his voice thick with unshed grief. Please, come again." In that moment, a powerful, unspoken bond was forged between them, a connection that transcended their stations and would alter the course of their lives forever. This simple act of kindness, a chance encounter guided by destiny, was a pivotal moment. Christine, the quiet maid, had unknowingly unlocked the door to the Patriarch's guarded heart, using the very key he thought was lost to time. The family secret was bubbling to the surface, and this shared, poignant moment was the beginning of a bond that would soon lead to a life-changing truth. One evening, Ronald Black was on his way to his grandfather's room for another brief, dutiful visit when he stopped short in the hallway. He heard a soft voice coming from within, and peering through the slightly ajar door, he saw a sight that completely bewildered him. It was Christine, the maid, sitting by the Patriarch's bedside, reading to him with a gentle and patient expression on her face. His grandfather, a man Ronald had only ever seen as stern and commanding, was listening with rapt attention, a look of peaceful sorrow in his eyes. This wasn't an act of service, it was a moment of genuine human connection. There was a quiet tenderness in the room that Ronald had never witnessed within his own family. Christine wasn't being paid to do this, it wasn't part of her job description. Her kindness was authentic, a heart-aching gesture offered freely to a lonely old man. For the first time, Ronald saw her not as a servant, but as a person, and the sight stirred something unfamiliar within him. He felt an uncomfortable prickle of shame. He, the man's own grandson, saw these visits as a chore, a box to be checked. He would come in, ask a few perfunctory questions about the old man's health, and leave as quickly as possible, eager to get back to his own shallow pursuits. But this girl, this employee, was giving his grandfather something he couldn't: her time, her patience, and her genuine warmth. It was a humbling, deeply unsettling realization. He began to question his own shallow judgments. He had dismissed her as a naive daydreamer, a nobody who was beneath his notice in his privileged world. Yet here she was, providing a comfort that no one else in his billionaire family, least of all himself, had thought to offer. The stark contrast between her genuine compassion and his own cynical detachment was a shocking revelation to him, a mirror held up to his own failings. He backed away from the door silently, a storm of conflicting emotions brewing inside him. The girl he had humiliated and mocked possessed a depth and grace that he sorely lacked. This realization was the first crack in the armor of arrogance he had worn his entire life. Could he have been wrong about her? Could he have been wrong about everything? The foundation of his worldview was beginning to crumble under the weight of this simple, kind act. This moment marked the beginning of a profound shift in Ronald. The budding love story, one he hadn't even known had started, was moving from a place of conflict to one of reluctant admiration. He started observing Christine from a distance, seeing her not through the lens of a rich man, poor woman cliché, but as an individual whose quiet strength was far more impressive than any display of wealth he had ever witnessed. He started noticing other things too. The way she would hum softly while she worked, the gentle way she treated the other staff, the brief, sad smiles she gave the portraits in the hall. These small details began to paint a picture of a woman who was far more complex and compelling than the simple caricature he had held in his mind. She was becoming real to him, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. His journey toward redemption had begun, though he wouldn't have called it that. To him, it was just a nagging confusion, a persistent feeling that the world was more complicated than he had ever believed. The invisible maid was becoming visible, and her presence was forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself, his family, and the true meaning of worth, setting up a major plot twist in his own character arc. A few days later, Christine was assigned the daunting task of deep cleaning the Patriarch's private study, a room that had been left untouched for years. It was a museum of the Black family's history, filled with antique furniture, rare books, and imposing oil portraits of ancestors. As she carefully dusted a large, gilded frame, her eyes were drawn to the painting within a portrait of a stern-looking man and his young, defiant-looking daughter from generations past. Her gaze drifted to the young woman's hand in the portrait. There, painted with meticulous detail on her wrist, was a unique birthmark, a small star-shaped cluster of marks. Christine froze, her rag hovering in midair. Her heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Slowly, she pulled up the sleeve of her own uniform, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at her own left wrist. It was identical. The same unique, star-shaped birthmark that she had had her entire life was staring back at her from the canvas, a perfect mirror of the one on her own skin. A wave of confusion and dizziness washed over her. It had to be a coincidence. It was impossible. And yet, the evidence was right there, a shocking link between her, a simple maid, and this powerful, long-dead ancestor of the billionaire family. She felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. What could this possibly mean? Her entire life, she had believed she was an orphan with no history, no lineage. This birthmark was just a random quirk of her biology. But now, it seemed to be a key, a signpost pointing to a secret identity so incredible, so far-fetched that her mind could barely grasp it. Was this a clue to her true identity? Her mind raced back to the photograph she had found. Could there be a connection? Was the woman in the photo related to this woman in the portrait? The questions multiplied, forming a dizzying web of possibilities. The strange feeling of belonging, the patriarch's sad, searching eyes, and now this. It was all starting to feel less like a series of coincidences and more like the pieces of a grand, hidden design, a map of her unknown past. The discovery left her deeply unsettled. It was a family secret, literally painted into the family's history, and somehow she was a part of it. The inexplicable feeling of belonging she had felt in the mansion suddenly clicked into place, not as a fantasy, but as a deeply buried, instinctual truth. It was an emotional, earth-shattering moment that left her with more questions than answers, and a growing sense of both fear and excitement about her own destiny. A sudden fear gripped her. This was dangerous knowledge. In a house built on secrets and power, a truth like this could be a weapon, or it could be a death sentence. She was just a maid, an outsider. What would happen if the family, especially Ronald and his cruel fiancée, ever found out that she suspected a connection, however impossible it seemed? They would surely see it as a threat. She quickly pulled her sleeve down, her mind racing. She couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? They would call her crazy or worse, an opportunist. Ronald would surely use it as another reason to have her humiliated and fired. For now, this incredible, potentially life-changing secret had to be hers and hers alone. A dangerous truth she held close as she continued to navigate the treacherous currents of the Black family mansion. Christine's growing bond with the patriarch, and the subtle, confusing shift in Ronald's attitude toward her, did not go unnoticed by Ronald's fiancée. Consumed by jealousy and insecurity, she saw the kind-hearted maid as a threat to her position in the billionaire family. She decided it was time to remove Christine from the picture permanently, and she devised a plan that was as cruel as it was calculated. Her own twisted form of revenge for a slight she had only imagined. During another grand family dinner, while Christine was busy serving, the fiancée slipped away. She went to her own jewelry box and retrieved a valuable diamond necklace, a family heirloom. Under the cover of the bustling party, she crept into the modest staff quarters and went straight to Christine's small, tidy room. With a smirk of triumph, she planted the expensive necklace deep within Christine's single suitcase, burying it beneath her folded clothes. The trap was set. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, the fiancée let out a theatrical scream, claiming her necklace was missing. A frantic search was organized, and she made a suggestion that was really a command: the staff's quarters should be searched as well. It was a masterclass in manipulation, A piece of high-stakes drama designed to utterly destroy an innocent person's reputation and livelihood. If you were in Christine's shoes, what would you do in this impossible situation? Be honest. Ronald, though he had been softening towards Christine, was immediately put on the defensive. The accusation came from his future wife, a woman from his own world. He wanted to believe Christine was innocent, but the pressure and the fiancé's convincing performance planted a seed of doubt. The rich man-poor woman divide was now a chasm of suspicion, and he found himself caught in the middle, his loyalties torn. Of course, the search concluded in Christine's room. When the head of housekeeping pulled the glittering necklace from her suitcase, a collective gasp filled the small space. Christine stared in horror, her face paling. "That's not mine," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've never seen that before in my life." But her pleas of innocence were drowned out by the fiancé's triumphant, scornful glare. She had been perfectly framed. The evidence was damning, and her world began to collapse around her. She looked from the necklace to the faces of her accusers, and finally to Ronald, her eyes pleading with him to believe her. It was a moment of pure betrayal. A plot twist driven by malice, and Christine knew, with a sickening certainty, that her time in the one place she had started to feel at home was about to come to a brutal and unjust end. The other staff members who had come to like and respect Christine looked on with a mixture of shock and fear. They didn't want to believe she was a thief, but the evidence was right there. More importantly, they knew better than to challenge an accusation made by Ronald Black's fiancée. To defend the lowly maid would be to risk their own jobs, so they remained silent. Their silence another form of betrayal that cut Christine deeply. She was completely alone, judged and condemned without a fair trial. The fiancé's poison had worked perfectly, isolating Christine from any potential allies and painting her as a common criminal. The warmth and sense of belonging she had started to feel in the mansion evaporated in an instant, replaced by the icy chill of false accusation and the crushing weight of helplessness. The discovery of the necklace sent a shockwave through the mansion. Ronald's fiancée played the victim to perfection, while Christine stood in stunned silence, the architect of her own ruin in everyone's eyes. Pressured by his fiancée and overwhelmed by the seemingly undeniable proof, a deeply conflicted Ronald was forced to act. He pulled Christine aside, his face a mask of cold disappointment that shattered her heart into a million pieces. "I knew it was too good to be true," he said, his voice laced with a bitter resignation that cut deeper than any shout could have. "I actually started to think you were different." Each word was a dagger, dismantling the fragile hope that had begun to grow between them. For Christine, this was the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just losing a job, it was losing the respect of the one person whose opinion had, against all odds, begun to matter to her. A part of him screamed that this was wrong, that the genuine kindness had witnessed couldn't coexist with such petty theft. He looked into her pleading, tear-filled eyes and saw the girl who read to his grandfather, not a criminal. But to believe her would be to declare war on his fiancée, on his own class, on everything his world was built upon. It was a choice between his gut and his entire life's programming, and in that moment of weakness, he chose the latter. She tried to protest, to explain that it was a setup, but her words were choked by tears. Seeing her cry only seemed to harden his resolve. In his mind, her tears were just confirmation of her guilt. He couldn't reconcile the kind girl who read to his grandfather with the thief who stood before him. The cynical part of him, the part that always believed the worst of people, won out. He felt humiliated for having ever doubted his instincts. And so, he fired her. He uttered the words coldly, officially severing her connection to the Black family and the home she had inexplicably come to love. The nascent love story had turned into a tragedy. As he walked away, he refused to look back, unable to face the devastation in her eyes. He was breaking her heart, but in a way he couldn't yet admit, he was breaking his own too. This was a drama with no winners. Christine was left standing alone, the weight of the injustice pressing down on her. The billionaire family had closed ranks, and she, the outsider, the maid, was cast out without a second thought. The dream of belonging, the tantalizing clues to her true identity, the birthmark, the photograph, it all turned to ash. All that was left was the searing pain of being misjudged and discarded by Ronald Black. As security flanked her to escort her to her room to pack, she felt a numbness spread through her. The shock was so profound, it was almost an out-of-body experience. She watched herself being led away as if she were a character in a movie. The movie of her life had just taken a dark, nightmarish turn, and the director was a man whose heart she had foolishly, briefly, begun to trust. She had been deemed unworthy, a common thief. It was a devastating blow, not just to her livelihood, but to her very soul. As the head of security prepared to escort her from the premises, she clutched the faded photograph in her pocket, the only piece of this life she could take with her. Her journey at the mansion had ended in shame, a shocking end to a chapter she thought was about to lead to a life-changing beginning. Devastated and alone, Christine Gomez was unceremoniously thrown out of the Black family mansion. The large iron gates, which had once seemed to hold the promise of a mysterious future, now slammed shut behind her with a deafening finality. She stood on the pavement with her single suitcase, containing all her worldly possessions, and the crushing weight of a crime she did not commit. The world had never felt so cold or so vast. She had lost more than just a job. She had lost the only place that had ever felt like home. The strange, comforting pull of the mansion was now a painful memory, a paradise from which she had been exiled. The face of the Patriarch, the budding respect from Ronald, the tantalizing mystery of her own past, it was all ripped away in an instant. She had been utterly and completely humiliated on her way out the door. Walking away from the estate, every step felt heavier than the last. The city lights blurred through her tears. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and a reputation now stained by a lie. This was the lowest point of her life, a falsa derrota so complete that it seemed impossible to ever recover from. It was the cruelest plot twist imaginable, one that made her question if destiny was just another word for pain. This was the dark side of the rich man, poor woman narrative, the part where the powerful crush the powerless without a second thought, and there's no fairy tale ending in sight. The love story she had barely allowed herself to dream of had ended in a brutal nightmare. All the emotional progress, all the heart-aching moments had been erased by one calculated act of revenge. She eventually found her way to a drab, impersonal bus station, where she sat amongst the other lost souls of the city. She pulled the old, faded photograph from her pocket and stared at the smiling woman. This picture was the only thing that still felt real, the last remaining thread connecting her to the possibility of a different life. But even that now seemed like a foolish dream, a relic from a life that wasn't hers to claim. The hours bled into one another as she sat on the hard plastic bench. The initial sharp agony began to dull into a deep, hollow ache. It was the ache of utter loneliness, the feeling of being a ghost in the world, unseen and uncared for. She had always been alone, but she had never felt it so acutely. The brief flicker of belonging shed felt at the mansion only made this return to solitude all the more brutal. A bitter sense of injustice began to curdle her grief. She wasn't just sad, she was angry. Angry at the fiancé for her cruelty, angry at Ronald for his weakness, and angry at herself for being so naive, for daring to hope. That anger, however, was a small flickering flame in a sea of despair. For now, it wasn't enough to warm her, not enough to show her a way out of the darkness. As she sat there, shivering and heartbroken, she felt a profound sense of loss. It wasn't just about the lie or the job. It was the loss of belonging, of a future that had briefly shimmered on the horizon before vanishing. For Christine, the world had gone dark, with no hope of redemption or justice in sight. She was just a maid, cast aside and forgotten, a nobody once again. Back at the mansion, a strange and hollow victory settled in. The fiancé was smugly triumphant, but Ronald Black couldn't shake an gnawing feeling of guilt. The image of Christine's tear-streaked, betrayed face was burned into his mind. He replayed his harsh words over and over, and they tasted like poison. Was it possible he had made a terrible mistake? The doubt grew into a relentless, churning anxiety that he couldn't ignore. Driven by this newfound conscience, he did something he should have done from the start. He went to the security office in the dead of night, dismissing the guard and pulling up the surveillance footage from the evening of the alleged theft. He needed to see it for himself, to erase any lingering doubt. He fast-forwarded through the footage, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a desperate hope he would find nothing. And then he saw it. A crystal-clear recording of his fiancée, and no one else, slipping into the staff quarters. He zoomed in, watching in horror as she opened Christine's suitcase, looked around furtively, and planted the necklace inside. The evidence was irrefutable, a cold digital confirmation of his worst fears. Christine was innocent. He had been played for a fool, and in doing so, he had destroyed an innocent woman. The depth of his mistake hit him with the force of a physical blow. He realized the sheer cruelty and malice behind the setup. But more than that, in that moment of shocking clarity, he finally understood the true depth of his feelings for Christine. It wasn't just admiration or confusion, it was something far deeper. The thought of what he had done to her, the pain he had caused, was unbearable. This was his moment of reckoning, the start of his path to redemption. A wave of self-loathing washed over him so powerful it made him physically ill. He saw himself for what he was: a coward. He had sacrificed an innocent person to maintain his comfortable, easy life. He had betrayed not only her, but the part of himself that had started to believe in something better. The reflection staring back at him from the dark monitor screen was that of a man he despised. Riddled with guilt and self-loathing, he understood that this wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about earning her forgiveness, something he knew he didn't deserve. The whole drama, the whole ugly affair, was a product of the venomous world he was raised in, a world that Christine had briefly made him want to escape. The fake love story with his fiancée dissolved into dust, revealing the real one he had blindly tried to crush. He saved the footage onto a secure drive, his hands shaking with a mixture of rage and resolve. His first instinct was to confront his fiancée, to unleash his fury upon her. But he knew that wouldn't fix the real damage. The priority wasn't punishing the guilty, it was finding the innocent. He had to find Christine, no matter what it took. He had to find her. He had to fix this. The plot twist wasn't just that she was innocent, it was that in losing her, he had finally found a part of himself he didn't know existed at his conscience, his heart. The rich man, poor woman narrative had been flipped on its head. He was the one who was truly poor, and he had just thrown away the only treasure he had ever found. Meanwhile, upstairs in his grand bedroom, the family patriarch was slowly recovering his strength. The illness had weakened his body, but it had sharpened his mind, clearing away the fog of old age and apathy. His thoughts kept returning to the kind young cleaner, the girl with the gentle voice who read poetry to him. He hadn't seen her in days, and her absence was a palpable void in the silent, lonely mansion. "Where's the girl?" he asked his nurse one afternoon, his voice raspy but firm. "The one who has been reading to me. I wish to see her." The nurse hesitated, exchanging an uncomfortable glance with a nearby staff member. There was a moment of awkward silence before the head of housekeeping was summoned to deliver the unfortunate news to the old man. "She is no longer with us, Mr. Black," the housekeeper said nervously. "There was an incident. She was dismissed for theft." The patriarch's eyes, which had been soft with reminiscence, hardened in an instant. Theft? The girl who showed him such selfless kindness. It didn't make any sense. It felt wrong, a discordant note in the melody of compassion she had brought into his life. He immediately suspected foul play. He knew the vipers that lived in his house, the petty jealousies that festered in the halls of the billionaire family. He knew his grandson's fiancée was capable of great cruelty. Theft of what? He demanded, sitting up straighter in his bed, the old fire returning to his gaze. When he was told it was a valuable necklace, his suspicion solidified into a near certainty. The housekeeper recounted the story as she knew with fiancée's distress, the search, the discovery in Christine's suitcase. But the patriarch listened not to the words, but to the narrative. It was too neat, too convenient. It was a story crafted for an audience, not an event that had unfolded organically. His decades of experience in the cutthroat world of business had taught him to recognize the scent of a meticulously planned takedown. "I want to see the proof," he commanded, his voice regaining its familiar tone of absolute authority. "They say there is security footage. I want to see it. Now." The staff scurried to comply, not daring to argue with the formidable head of the family. They thought his interest was merely in confirming the guilt of the thieving maid, a simple matter of household justice. He settled back against his pillows, his mind sharp and clear. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about a household matter. It was about justice. It was about protecting the one person who had shown him a moment of pure, unadulterated kindness in a very long time. He felt responsible for her, and he would not fail her. They had no idea that the patriarch wasn't looking for proof of a crime. He was looking for evidence of a lie. His protective instinct towards Christine, which he had felt during the party, roared back to life. He would not let an injustice happen under his roof, not to this girl who had touched his weary heart. The stage was set for another shocking revelation, as he was about to see the footage and discover a truth far more profound than a simple frame job. A laptop was brought to the patriarch's bedside, and the security footage was played for him. He watched the screen with an intense, unwavering focus as the silent drama unfolded. He saw Ronald's fiancée sneak into the staff quarters, plant the necklace, and slink away. A grim, knowing expression settled on his face. It was exactly as he had suspected, a cruel and calculated frame-up. He was filled with a cold fury at the deceit. But that wasn't what shocked him. As the housekeeper replayed the footage of Christine being confronted in her room, the old man leaned closer to the screen. "Stop. Freeze the frame there," he commanded, his voice trembling slightly. The image froze on a distraught Christine, her hands raised in a gesture of helpless defense. The camera angle was perfect, providing a clear close-up shot of her left wrist. And there it was, the birthmark. The unique, star-shaped pattern he hadn't seen in over 30 years, not since he last saw it on the wrist of his own rebellious beloved daughter. The one he had driven away with his pride and stubbornness. The air left his lungs in a sudden gasp. It couldn't be. All these years, he thought she had vanished without a trace, taking his lineage with her. Everything clicked into place in a blinding, life-changing flash of understanding. Christine's inexplicable connection to the home. The strange feeling of familiarity he felt when he looked at her. Her quiet strength and grace, so reminiscent of her mother. It wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny. This young maid, this girl he had felt so compelled to protect, was the child of his long-lost daughter. She was his granddaughter. The laptop nearly slipped from his grasp. The world around him seemed to fade away, the sounds of the mansion replaced by a roaring in his ears. It was a revelation so immense, so reality-altering, that it almost stopped his heart. He had been living under the same roof as his own blood, his only living legacy, and had treated her as a servant. The shame and regret were overwhelming, matched only by a tidal wave of unbelievable joy. The patriarch stared at the frozen image, his heart overwhelmed with a tidal wave of emotions: shock, regret, grief, and a soaring, unbelievable joy. The family secret wasn't just a story of the past, it was a living, breathing person who had been living under his own roof, cleaning his floors. This was the ultimate plot twist, a revelation so profound it completely rewrote his family's history and his own future. He finally understood everything. The theft, the frame-up, it was all secondary now. A miracle had been delivered to his doorstep, and his family, in their ignorance and cruelty, had just thrown it away. He looked up from the screen, his eyes blazing with a newfound purpose. He wasn't just a sick old man waiting to die anymore. He was a grandfather who had just found his heir, and he would move heaven and earth to right this wrong and bring his true identity to light. With shaking hands, he rewound the footage again and again, just to be sure. Each time, the star-shaped mark stared back at him, a symbol of his failure and his second chance. The illness, the weakness he had felt for weeks, seemed to vanish, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated purpose. He had a family to mend, a legacy to secure, and a granddaughter to find. With a strength and fury no one thought he still possessed, the Patriarch called for an urgent family meeting. He commanded the presence of Ronald and his fiancée, along with the senior members of the Black family board. The atmosphere in the grand drawing room was thick with tension. The fiancée looked smug, believing this was about finalizing Christine's dismissal, while Ronald was pale with guilt, knowing the truth was about to explode. "We are here to discuss a matter of grave injustice," the Patriarch began, his voice echoing with its old power as he stood, refusing to remain seated. He didn't waste any time. He had the security footage projected onto a large screen for all to see. The room fell into a stunned silence as the video played, clearly exposing the fiancée's deceitful act of planting the necklace. Her face went from triumphant to ashen in seconds. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The engagement was called off, and the fiancée was disgraced, her web of lies completely incinerated by the undeniable proof. The room buzzed with the shocking revelation of her treachery. But the old man held up a hand, silencing the murmurs. The exposure of the lie was merely the prelude to his main announcement. The real bombshell, the true plot twist, was yet to come. That, however, is not the most important discovery I have made. The Patriarch continued, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. He then projected the frozen image of Christine's wrist, the star-shaped birthmark clear for all to see. "This birthmark has been in our family for generations. It was a mark my own daughter carried." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, enjoying the confused silence. "For 30 years, I have lived with the regret of driving my daughter away. I believed I had lost her, and any heir she might have had forever," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he had hidden for decades. "I was wrong." He looked directly at Ronald. "The young woman you all knew as Christine Gomez, the maid you so carelessly cast aside, is the child of my child. She is my long-lost granddaughter and the true heir to the Black family legacy." The announcement detonated in the room, a life-changing revelation that shattered everyone's understanding of their world. The billionaire family was in an uproar. A servant girl? An heir? It was unthinkable. The family secret was now out in the open, and the revelation of Christine's true identity had changed the line of succession and the very future of the empire in a single, breathtaking moment. The drama had reached its absolute peak. Ronald felt the floor give way beneath him. It wasn't just guilt anymore, it was a cosmic, crushing irony. He hadn't just wronged an innocent maid, he had humiliated his own cousin, the true heir. His cruelty, his arrogance, all of it was now cast in a horrifying new light. He was not just a fool, he was a villain in his own family story, a story that was now centered on the very woman he had cast out. The Patriarch surveyed the chaos his words had caused, his expression grim but resolute. This was only the beginning. He had exposed the truth, But the real work was yet to be done. He had to undo the damage, to heal the wounds his family's arrogance had inflicted. And most importantly, he had to find his granddaughter and beg her for a forgiveness he knew he hadn't earned. Reeling from the revelation of Christine's true identity and consumed by a desperate need for redemption, Ronald Black fled the mansion. He searched the city frantically, calling every shelter and using every resource his family's name could muster. Finally, he found her at a bus station on the edge of town, about to board a bus to nowhere, to leave her past and her pain behind. He ran to her, calling her name, his voice ragged with desperation. In the middle of the crowded, noisy terminal, he fell to his knees before her, ignoring the stares of the onlookers. "Christine, forgive me," he begged, his voice breaking. "I was a blind, arrogant fool. I never should have doubted you. I was wrong about everything." It was a grand public apology, a complete surrender of the pride he had held onto his entire life. It was the most honest, emotional moment of his existence, the culmination of his painful transformation. Christine stood frozen, her heart in turmoil as she looked down at the heir to the black fortune kneeling at her feet. This was the man who had humiliated her and then shattered her heart, now completely broken before her. Before she could process his apology, a black car pulled up and the family patriarch emerged, looking stronger than he had in years. He walked slowly, purposefully, toward her, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regret and love. "My child," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he reached her. "I have spent 30 years praying for a second chance." He gently took her hand and looked at the birthmark on her wrist. "Your mother would have been so proud of the woman you've become." He then pulled her into a warm, powerful embrace, a hug that conveyed decades of unspoken sorrow and a boundless, welcoming love. "Welcome home, my granddaughter." In that moment, everything changed. She wasn't Christine Gomez, the maid, anymore. She was home, not as a servant, but as the true heir to the Black family legacy. The patriarch embracing her was a symbol of her acceptance, her destiny finally realized. The bystanders watched, captivated by the raw, heart-aching scene, a real-life fairy tale, a love story not just of romance, but of family rediscovered. Like this video as a sign of respect for the patriarch's quest for redemption. As she hugged her grandfather, Christine finally let the tears fall, not tears of pain, but of overwhelming relief. The inexplicable pull she had felt toward the mansion, the connection to the photograph, the familiarity in the old man's eyes, it all made sense now. It wasn't a fantasy, it was an instinct, a memory in her blood calling her home. She finally understood. She belonged. Ronald watched the embrace, his heart aching with hope and fear. He knew his apology was only the first step on a long road. The journey of their rich man, poor woman story was far from over, but now it was a story of equals. Christine, surrounded by the family she never knew she had, looked over at him, her expression unreadable but no longer filled with hate. For the first time, she saw not an arrogant heir, but a man desperate for his own redemption. It was a life-changing conclusion and a new beginning all at once. The final plot twist had been revealed, justice had been served, and the path was now clear for a future no one could have ever predicted. The family had been broken and remade, all because of a quiet girl whose true worth was finally, dazzlingly, brought into the light. Her quest for belonging was complete, not by gaining wealth, but by finding her home. In the end, it wasn't money or status that defined her true worth, but the kindness she never lost and a destiny written in her blood. Christine's story reminds us that the most profound value is found not in a title, but in the truth of who we are. If you also believe that our true identity can't be hidden by a uniform and that redemption is always possible, then you've found your place. Subscribe and join our community of story lovers who know that the best tales are always about the heart. Now for our trifecta of engagement. Let's make this story echo, Hit the like button to spread the message that kindness is the ultimate superpower. For our question of the day, what was the most satisfying moment of justice for you? The fiancé's exposure or Ronald's public apology? Let us know in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that life can have a fairy tale ending, share this story with them and become part of their positive moment. And don't let the journey end here. While you wait for our next upload, know that our channel is a treasure chest of emotional journeys just like this one. Explore our older videos and discover other unforgettable tales you might have missed. Finally, to make sure you don't miss any of the incredible stories we have coming, activate that notification bell. You never know what shocking twist or heartaching moment is just around the corner, and you won't want to be left out of the next adventure.